My name is Jo Lansdowne. I'm Director of Research here at Watershed. I'm a white woman with short blonde hair and I'm wearing a black jumper today. So every Friday, we open up the doors of Pervasive Media Studio for what we call Open Studio Friday. So as well as the talk here today, everyone's really welcome to come and join and work in the studio alongside our residents if you'd like to. So that's every Friday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. I want to make an especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Do we have anyone here who's never been to the studio before? Oh, welcome, lots of people, brilliant. Well, this bit's especially for you. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do here. So Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology. We have a community here that involves everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we have funding from Arts Council England. Just move out of the way. So what we do here is that we offer space free of charge to a community of residents who work here. They run events. We have lots of public events. And we have a team of producers who support that community to make amazing work. And we do that with a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And these talks are part of that as well. So a few notes for today. Please feel really free to move around if you'd like to. There's a kitchen at the back there. You can make yourself a cup of tea, grab a glass of water. Please don't use the microwave because it interferes with our hearing loop system. Just over here to my left is a quiet space. So if you do need to take a moment out from the talk, at any point you can go in there and it should be relaxed and comfortable and quiet for you. There's fire exits at either end of the studio and one of the team will guide you there if we need to. There's also accessible toilets and baby changing in the corridor just next to the kitchen. So we'll have a talk and then there'll be a Q&A at the end of the talk. If you're watching online, you can put your questions in the YouTube chat and Lowerton will be your voice in the room today. And if you're here in the building, you can just put up your hand and I will bring you this microphone. This microphone doesn't amplify your voice, but it's really important for the people online to be able to hear you. So please do use it if you need to speak to us. You can get news on all our future talks at watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, and at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. We're not on Twitter/X anymore, so if you're still looking there, then try and follow us somewhere else so you get all of our information. So the last thing, there are still a few seats up here if you're standing at the back. Please don't worry about walking through. The last thing for me to say really is to let you know that today's talk is part of Home, which is a year-long programme here at Watershed of making, experiencing and sharing ideas about home. Throughout the year, we've got films, immersive arts, talks and workshops that are exploring the many different ways in which people find, make, imagine, long for and escape home. You can find out more about the whole programme at watershed.co.uk/home, and there's also a YouTube playlist of all the lunchtime talks that have been around this topic so far. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for today now. We're really delighted to welcome Elena Marco, who is the Vice-Chancellor and Head of the College of Arts, Technology and Environment at the University of the West of England, and Sarah Habel, who is one of her PhD researchers, who is exploring ideas of the home. So please join me in giving them a really warm welcome.
Thank you for today. Both of us, so I'm a white woman with a pink jumper, with a very, very strong Spanish accent after 28 years in the UK. And I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, and I'm a white woman in an orange jumper.
So this is a special for us because it's not what I normally do in my daily job. I have seen a lot of faces here that they see me doing things that they are not related with the home. But both of us are very interested in the lived experience of the home. And I've been doing either or building houses as an architect or doing research in relation to the home for now over 20 years. And Sarah has been working on her PhD now for over 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a double act because we thought it would be really nice to see two perspectives in terms of what kind of feelings and emotions in relation to the home. So you're going to see two projects. We will be around 20 minutes each, and then we'll try to open it for another 20 minutes of questions for both of us. Okay. So one of the things that for us was really important, let's move it on. So you will pass if you can pass the slides, we'll be able to start thinking about what's the responses to the home. And some of them are kind of related to positive and negative experiences. So in my personal life, I've done an upside-down career. I was an architect. I ended up being in academia. I ran in a massive college. But in my spare time, what I did was a PhD. And a PhD which was based in kind of design research and by practice. And when I was doing the PhD, I also redid my own house. And my own house was redone based on the findings of the PhD. My PhD was all about stuff, crap that you have got in your homes. How many of you have got rooms full of cables and simply things that you might need, but you are never used on the last 10 or 15 years? Hands up. Yeah. So I did a PhD on that, which I thought was quite extraordinary, because when you talk to very serious academic people, saying that you do a PhD on crap and the home and space was an kind of inspirational idea. But then when I was designing my own house or retrofitting my own house, I was thinking about how to apply the kind of findings of my own PhD. So you are going to have an experience of my own house, what I did, and why I continue working on that and what has happened. So, a house for staff. Loads and loads of staff. So, 15 years ago, we bought a 1960s house in Bath. I think it's very posh. It's a palace because it's got 4 steps. But that was the state of what I bought. It was an interesting space. It actually was really well built in relation to the space. It was built to Parker Morris standards, 1960s. So compared to the Lilliput houses that they are building nowadays, this was a palace. And just to kind of get an idea, it was the 1950s, 140 square meters, which is tremendously generous in UK standards, and you can see what type of spaces it had. So that was my home. I'm an architect. You can imagine kind of the house had a lot of potential, but it is not for an architect. So kind of it took me 15 years to get it to where it is nowadays. But what we did is we retrofitted it. So this is what it is nowadays. Yeah. And you can see what we did. So we retrofitted it, we super insulated it. For me, it was really important that that space was able to become a kind of quiet space where I could hide from my everyday stresses. It needed to be kind of a balance of communal and private areas. I share the house with now my husband and a 16-year-old. So it's just kind of 3 people in a really nice house. And it had to be flexible with multi-use spaces, really strong connection to nature, and the whole house was designed for storage. It's full of freaking cupboards everywhere. And it had to be quiet, warm and really quiet. So when I kind of started thinking about it, I was putting everything that I had done in my PhD into practice. And then it felt that I had not finished, because I've done this whole house designed for a PhD, and I never did a research on my own house as itself. So I've decided I had one project missing, which was about kind of looking at kind of the research aspects of my own house. So I used the house as a kind of experiment, as a big laboratory, and I've been collecting a diary for now it's not 6 months, it's over 8 months, trying to kind of record the cycles of activities of how possessions go from one place to the next. So from the milk bottle that you take from the fridge to do your cup of tea, not tea for me, but coffee, to kind of goes into the recycle bin, it goes out to things that you decide, ooh, it might have some value. So I'm going to put it in the top shelf. Then 3 years later, you realize you've never touched it, but ooh, still has got value. So then you put it in the attic. And then 10 years later, you think, ooh, maybe I'm ready to let it go. So what I did is a kind of a diary over time, and I also look at the plans and start kind of identifying who uses the spaces, where kind of the different possessions can keep moving through the house. And obviously my husband and my son kept looking at me and thinking, what is this woman doing? And so I was mad in that aspect. But they kind of are going to be part of the research project. So the research project is not going to be about just me. So I've been collecting all that data, and you will see what I've been doing, but also it's going to be semi-structured interviews with people that access the home. So my husband and my son will be two of the people that I am kind of about to be interviewed, but also the people who access the home at specific times of the year, like my parents, my sister, friends that they come for occasional dinners and lunches, and then see how they perceive the house from their own perspective, and how they then kind of they do reflections on their own houses as a consequence of that. So the idea is the house becomes that experimental space because it's been designed for stuff and material possessions, and then they can see their own reflections on their own lived experiences in their own houses. But one of the things it has happened as well, which I didn't realize, is cultures merge, because I'm Spanish, so my parents are Spanish. They come from a different ways of doing things. Kind of my friends, I realize I've got many multicultural friends that they come from many countries, which again, they have got different experiences. And as a consequence of that, that has become a really interesting way of looking at the house, which is not just about my house, but it is from different cultural perspectives. So, and I always do drawings. For some reason, I'm an architect, so I draw things. It's the way I have got to synthesize, and I have way of, and that will be something Sarah does also in her PhD, and you will see that going. So keep going, just make sure I'm not too late. So as you said, I was saying, I've collected 178 photographs. I opened all the cupboards. You can see my kitchen cupboards. You can see my son plates, which is just shows you that he's not as tidy as his mother would like, his blankets. So all that has become a diary, and that's going to be part of the interviews when you show them kind of almost making the home completely visible, the bad, the good, and the ugly, to kind of your guests, your family, and your own members to see. And then, as I was saying, I always draw, so those are the plans of the house, and I've been just kind of analyzing, whose space is my husband, whose space is mine, who uses this space, where there is conflict, because the husband, I am being told that I always leave my plate on top of the dishwasher, never in the dishwasher. My husband sometimes puts post-it notes to tell me, you have to put it in the dishwasher. And then the same, you will see that I have to talk to him about cables and wireless, which has got more cables than you've ever, and then because from here to here is wireless, and behind that it's got thousands of kilograms of wireless. So that is almost been revealed as part of this exercise of the home. Next one. So because all of you have got every day, every week, every kind of month, every year activities, and things kind of flow in the house. So this is a diagram which tries to kind of start unpacking the things that you might display for others to see, the things that they are really hidden, the things that you use every day, every week, every month, every season, and then the spaces that they hold stuff from kilograms and kilograms of cables By the way, 6 routers, I know now, to your sons, to clothes that you have never used, and kind of how that kind of ends up being in spaces that they become archivable through time. So that was part of my PhD, and I've mapped all my house in relation to some of those findings. And as you can see, I've opened everything in the house to see. Things that some of you might not want to ever anyone else to see, but they are out there. At the kind of next. And I've now conducted 6 different interviews where all this is kind of also visible to those ones that they've only seen part of it because they've invited on the house, or even my husband and my son don't know what kind of half of the cupboards have, as you will imagine. And that has been really interesting to start thinking about how you structure storage in terms of, things that you use every day. They are very close and you have it close by hand. But actually, if you use it kind of occasionally, slightly higher, and then you have got kind of things that they kind of almost never come up. Like, for example, Easter egg cups or Christmas lights. So all that has been categorized now as part of my findings. Yeah, keep going. And that is kind of a bit of the elements, kind of your kind of my laundry cabinet. The fact that my clothes have not got a space. They always kind of go around the house because there is no proper laundry room to kind of leave your clothes. Or the fact that I couldn't throw away my son's primary school drawings, even if he is 16. Or the fact that kind of my husband had 20 kilos of cables with 6 routers under the bed. So all that came out, and as a consequence that it's been really interesting because, part of it is like you never throw anything away until it loses its value. So once it loses your value, you are ready to let it go. And some of the research that I've been working on, it says that you almost go through a grieving process. So and that's why you put it in a holding space for a bit until you are able to kind of say, ooh, I might need it. And then you still don't need it 5 years later, and then you might be ready to let it go. But one of the interesting bits of this project is we've tidied up the house as a consequence of this as well. Because my husband and I made a kind of conscious effort to make the interviews with my husband and my son last. So I know there is 20 kilos because now the 20 kilos has been put in a recycle with the 6 routers as a consequence of this project. We've been able to throw away my son's primary school drawings and some of his YouTuber special kits that he got through COVID. And I was even able to throw away my 5 kilos of notes from my PhD. And all those things that end up having value is because they have meant something really important at some point in your lives. And that's why you cannot let it go. And different people hold different things. And I wonder if any of you is thinking about your own houses and your own rooms and the things that you have got that you don't want to let it go, but you've never had use for 20 years, and the things that actually you let it kind of go. It's relation to value. So what were my findings? So there is an emotional attachment to objects, and that's something Sarah is going to kind of pick up because that was very nicely follows her PhD. And you could see some of the quotes I've started emerging from some of the interviews that I've started having and some of the things that you will be able to see. Clutter, storage, and decluttering is very emotionally loaded. It's very personal, and kind of what you think is tidy, my husband thinks is absolutely kind of ridiculous. So for example, making the bed, for me, it just makes the space calm, nice. My husband doesn't see a point because he's going to use it the night after. So what for? Gender roles and division of labor. So it's really interesting because that has made us look at the kind of who does what in the house and why, and how you divide the labor, who takes care of certain things and not. And very clearly, there is certain things that have kind of evolve in doing that. There is also different personalities. That means there is conflict in the house and spaces need to be negotiated. And there is also spaces that you feel is yours or he feels is his. And there is always kind of traces of identity, culture, and that comes kind of, I've got a whole Spanish drawer, which is just it's got Spanish food, comes from my culture, from where I come from. keep going. So the other things kind of were really important is ritual and traditions. So he is from Sheffield, I'm from Spain. We have got very different approaches, and also they need to cohabit. And more, the houses become these multicultural and multi-nodal spaces. And that has become really, really interesting. And then obviously, rooms are not static, they keep evolving. So if you think about it, my son has gone from being 2 or 3 years old when I started this house to being 16. What their needs kind of completely changed. What was very important for me in my 30s and 40s is not in my 50s, so things change and evolve. So the home becomes a retreat, a space to recharge and nurture and recover. And also it's really important for me in particular on this project, this idea of decluttering, fostering a calm and restorative atmosphere for the home. So from my perspective, this is a glimpse of what I do and why I do it. It is all about stuff charged with emotions and charged with kind of a personal element of uncovering or making visible things that all of us probably have on our houses, but actually they are hidden to the normal research in relation to the home. And one of the things I've been trying to do for years is uncovering that reality of the everyday practices of what we have to completely continue championing that houses are designing for people, not for the anonymous person. And now I'm going to move to Sarah and change tactics.
So yeah, I'm Sarah, and this research is on designing homes for positive emotional responses. And I'd like to begin by asking you all to think about if you've ever walked into a room and immediately felt calm. Or I can turn this around and I can ask you to think about if you've ever walked into a space and felt claustrophobic or uncomfortable, even though there was plenty of room. So this is not a mere coincidence. Architecture has the profound ability to provoke emotional responses. And those emotional responses are largely taking place at a subconscious level. But how you're emotionally responding to your home can impact your stress levels, your energy levels, and even your immune system. And this matters because post-pandemic, we're spending more time in our homes, both for working or for socializing. And in the UK, housing is predominantly produced by volume house builders using standardized plans that largely overlook this emotional level in their design process. Which brings me to this research, which is how we can include the subconscious nature of emotional response into the housing design process to improve well-being through design. And I guess the starting point, or perhaps the turning point, was during the literature review when I realized just how important childhood spatial experiences are on adult emotional responses to the home. And so spatial experiences throughout childhood create a sort of subconscious rulebook in our minds, which is unique to each individual, but that is guiding how you emotionally respond to the built environment throughout your life. And this evolves and adapts as you become an adult, but really the building blocks are in childhood. And today I would like to talk to you about some findings from a pilot study that we carried out, which was designed through looking towards psychology and art, through prototyping and testing with other participants, through the literature review, and through testing physiological measures and design research methods. And this pilot study, so it's not the final outcome, it's not what we're saying is how you include emotional response in the design process. It's rather been used as a tool that we can learn about emotional response and learn about how we can elicit emotional response, positive emotional response in housing design. And so we're now in the second stage of the data collection, which we hope to then inform tools and frameworks. But for today, it's about the pilot study. So the pilot study involved 10 participants. It was a mixed methods interview, which involved psychodynamic and ethnographic methodologies. Next, please. And it involved 4 questions over 3 time periods. And this was really to try and explore that role of childhood. And it was really important that in the questions around childhood, that the wording was space or place. And this is because for some people that could be a den where they feel most at home, for some people it's the garden, some people it's a friend's house. So it was really important that that wasn't just restricted to their own home. And then the current home, where they're currently living. And again, this was to give insight into the usually private space of the home. And future ideal is in understanding that for most people, they're probably not living in their ideal home. Next one, thank you. And this was a 3-stage interview. So the first stage of the interview heavily relied on free association. And if I just give you a really quick example of that, if I was to say the word lunch to you, the initial words that come to mind, so that could be cookie, sandwich, table, the initial first thoughts that you have to the questions, when I ask the questions around home, I asked the participants to then write down onto word cards. And then secondly, they did free drawing. So that's when they'd close their eyes and let the pen drift across the page, and whatever images came to mind, they'd put down. And this was to try and bypass rational thought, because I wasn't interested in what they thought I wanted them to say, and I wasn't interested in what they thought perhaps society would like them to say. I was really interested in what design elements for them or spatial experiences would elicit positive emotional responses. And then these word cards and pictures were used in the second stage of the interview, where the participants, in the second stage, where the participants explained what those words and drawings meant to them. And while they were doing that, they engaged with objects. So looking to the work of people such as Donald Winnicott, who's a psychoanalyst, and Liga Clark, an artist, into the role that objects can play in meeting the inner and outer worlds. And so while people are speaking to me about what they think the words and cards mean, they're engaging. And so it applies an architectural language and a form. And these were filmed in plan and elevation to give an orthographic language when they're watched back. And then the third and final stage is a photo submission, which was really an afterthought, but actually it tied all the data together. Because when they went back home and they submitted a photo, suddenly you could see the elements that they were talking about and the designs that they were talking about in the childhood. You could see the ideal, all little aspects of these within that photo. And then all this data went through a 2-stage analysis. So the first of which is creative thematic analysis, so gathering, as you can see in this picture, all the data into fold-out sketchbooks so that I could see it all in one place. And then that went through to coding software NVivo to really identify patterns and themes. And it's because I was interested first and foremost in the themes in response to the questions themselves, and then across the questions, and then across participants. And I think it's probably a good thing that for all 10 participants, there was a very strong link to childhood, so that was agreeing with the literature. Next one. And then if I'd like to just quickly tell you some of the themes that emerged. So the first theme I was probably expecting, which was on the role of green space. And that's what was mentioned either directly or indirectly. So primarily for green space, it was indirectly through the word cards and in the images that they drew. And Yui's doing some fantastic research on green space and health and just how important it is for well-being. And for all 10 participants, that was shown in that theme. Next one. The next theme was not quite so expected. So for some people, the journey through the home, the stairs, the paths around the outside of the home, is more important to eliciting positive emotional response. So for those people, you hear in childhood about the journeys through the spaces. That's what they chose to speak about. In their current home, the things that they're taking photos of or that they're talking to me about, again, it was about the journey through the space. And in that ideal, but also character. So if you do the next one, thank you. Unsurprisingly perhaps, all 10 were asking for something different. No one asked for standardized like everybody else's home. And this relates back to the study of neuroarchitecture, which is neuroscience for architecture, which says that our brains really love difference. They love texture, they love materiality. And this was kind of reflected in some of the words that were given during the verbal narrative. And people were saying things such as exciting window shapes, not boring windows, maybe a bit quirky and something a bit different. So I think that's something when we're doing standardized homes we can maybe try and apply. Yeah, next one. And then the role of privacy. So for some people, this could be for the home itself. That was for just a few. But for the majority of people, this was a private space within the home. And some people had this to the extreme of actively blocking out windows, and also the role of artificial lighting. So I really hadn't expected this one. When in designing, and again referring back to the green space and health, I'm expecting natural light being what you need for positive emotional responses, but for some people it's the exact opposite. And I found that really interesting, and I'm hoping to explore that further with next data collection. So for some people, in their written words, they're writing lamps, they're writing low lighting. In their drawings, they're drawing lamps, and then they're doing waves to represent the low lighting. And in the photo submission, they're actively blocking out windows with televisions so that in that room that's their favourite space within their home, there is no natural light. So that was something really eye-opening to me. And just some of the words that people were saying, separation from everybody else is quite key, a cubby hole where you can get away from things, and you could go in there and you could hide and be yourself in there. No one could see you. And just the final one, which is linking back to Elena's fabulous work, which is on the importance of stuff. So when I did these interviews, I prefaced that I was looking into the architectural design elements and the spatial qualities. And so I really wasn't expecting this to come up. But actually, if we think about it, it is an architectural design element because you need to have the space to store the objects, and you need to have the space for the furniture. And that isn't a given. And next slide, please. Thank you. The most important piece of furniture that was repeatedly drawn back to by participants was the dining table. And people such as Sarah Wigglesworth have already emphasised the importance of this in the performance of the dining table. But actually, this became a real anchor to people, an emotional anchor throughout their design preferences. And they could mention it in childhood, in the dining table that they referenced to as the perfect den, or that they used to love being around people socialising at the dining table, or people in their current homes that really enjoy the space where they provide food or play board games, or people in their ideal home acknowledging that right now they don't have the space for a dining table, but that's something that they'd really have in their ideal home. So again, I'm not saying this is the method, the final method for all designers to include emotional response in, not at all. This is just a method that I'm using to explore the subconscious nature of emotional response and how we can include this in the housing design process. Because first and foremost, everybody needs a home, but in the provision of these, we have the opportunity to improve well-being and to provide care through how we design. And we think it's through including emotional response into the design process.
So that's just for summing up, 2 projects, 2 different approaches, using drawing, both of us, drawing, photography, very architectural tools, to try to capture emotions or hidden aspects of the home. We have seen a massive push for building new homes nowadays, but what we are seeing is we have having much more rise of well-being in the home, people with neurodiversity, people with different elements that they need to be bridged and considered. And yes, the home is a facilitator of relationships, of storage space, waste, and they will do some of activities. But for us, one of the most important things to consider is the emotional side of things through either how you feel into the spaces or the things that you have that make it your own. Because at the end of the day, the home is the space where emotions live and those relationship heals. And we think it has been underrepresented in the research. And especially from a perspective of how do you design spaces for people, their stuff, and their emotions. And we wanted to leave you with almost this photographic that we both are really, really keen for emotional architecture for well-being, where stuff and emotions, positive or negative, inhabit within the home. Thank you.
Great, thank you both so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Hello. Thank you both very much indeed. How old were your participants and from what backgrounds did they come?
So the participants were aged from 25 to 65, and the backgrounds, the socioeconomic backgrounds were very diverse, and that did seem to impact the research, obviously, because those, with when it came to the ideal home and the current home and the differences between those. But definitely we looked at the pilot study, and for the next data round connection, we're using a snowball method to try and diversify that even further.
And in my case, I had people from 16-year-old to 79-year-old, and everything in between. So there was kind of 17 participants in total.
But they all could see, presumably.
They all could see.
Were any of your
just looking at-
participants blind?
Not
Or
blind.
like me, partially blind?
The cataracts, if that counts, but not not from that disabled of blind. No.
Thank you very much.
That's all right. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
De nada. Pleasure.
That point about making the bed and loading the dishwasher is kind of links with the most heated arguments in my household, which are about gender roles and concepts of tidiness. And people have recommended a set of cards called Fair Play, which are said to be a new way to divvy up the domestic responsibilities. Do you think that would be helpful to me to challenge our gender roles?
There is a lot of negotiation in this. Sometimes I think in my daily job, when I'm at the university, I have to have very difficult conversations. I have to kind of really kind of have a lot of patience, calm myself down, be able to see someone else's perspectives. And I've realized I use the same techniques at home. And so does my husband. So the kind of the home end has been an element where there is a lot of conflict sometimes, a lot of negotiation, culture. So different people see things from different perspectives. And it's just sometimes it's kind of, we underestimate, because one of the things is coming up in the next stage of the research is that there is a home within a home within a home. Each of us has got the specific spaces we almost retreat individually, and some of the spaces within the home that you are able to share with other people. And I think that is really tricky. One of the things I have learned, especially interviewing my own parents, if that makes any sense, is that kind of the expectations are so different and it's intergenerational. So kind of my dad has only fried an egg, right, in his life. He's never had done the bed. But now it's helping, it's really interesting because now it's helping my mom, which, by the way, she just had an accident with her motorbike at 77 without a helmet last week. And then it just puts things into, she's fine, by the way, but it just makes you realize that actually things change and the role shifted through time. And that's why the house, I think, is not static. It's something that changes as kind of circumstances come. But a good conversation in the home is never a bad thing to kind of negotiate those spaces. I'll encourage you to have it with your wife. See where it goes.
I've heard about the Fair Play cards. I haven't used them, but maybe if anyone else in the audience has, they can share their tips afterwards.
Thanks very much. This question's from an online viewer, and they ask, I wonder if these studies were repeated with people not living in their own homes, for example, homeless people, refugees, etc. What might this reveal?
Really, I've looked at studies, so that's really interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things I've always considered is like my research or our research doesn't consider that those kind of situations which almost you've been taken everything, all this idea of value or things that matter to you is been taken away or you don't have a space for that. However, it's really interesting, there's a lady in Leeds that does research on the homeless in particular. And one of the things he was saying is like kind of they actually gather elements of value around them, kind of specific blankets or specific things that they have. And there is an element very similarly, but obviously in a very different situations. And Robert Moll does a lot of work, especially in Calais with the refugees. And again, it's like kind of different communities come together and they have got different ways of kind of doing shelter taking into consideration their own personal experiences and the cultures they come from. So I understand that this is a very, we could say, everyday life of someone that owns a house or has a house, and it doesn't kind of lead to kind of those much more extreme situations. But it's really interesting that there is very little research in relation to almost like kind of everyday type of solutions of kind of which are not kind of the events of homelessness or the events of refugees in that aspect. So it's a very tricky space. Also, one of the things I've discovered through the research on the home is so complex. Because it's not even that, you've got also things, so kind of one of the interviews we are doing is adopted families, so they've got kids that come from very challenging backgrounds, and that adds another different type of pressure. So one of the things I've discovered is very complex, interlayer, and very contested spaces, regardless what lenses you use, and you may have some ideas on that as well.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to do that, though. I think it's their voices that need to be included in how we design. And I think the reason I wanted to do this was because the volume housing and the standardized housing at a certain point is absolutely fabulous because it's got the space to be flexible. But at the other end, there's not the space to be flexible. So that's really where I think the research is needed and where I'm hoping the themes and recommendations can head.
Hello. I was really interested in what you were saying about the wires and the boxes of things, because I think in Bristol there's a massive accumulation of things that you can find discarded on the streets, and similarly there's this idea of if you have something in that you're still attached to it, kind of halfway between state. Sometimes the next place is to put it on the wall outside your house and that kind of thing. So yeah, like with all of these items, like I collect a lot of these things and I make work out of them periodically. I try and keep crates. It sounds like I'm a hoarder, but me and my wife live in a tiny room where we run our business and both of our art practices. So it is a chaotic space that isn't really for anybody else. And we live with a family who have more of a tidy house where we can feel at home. And we've kind of just got to this position where we feel like our living and working and sleeping space just works somehow. So it's not ideal, but it's very different. But one thing about those wires is if you take the black plastic off the top, they're quite attractive inside. You've got lots of nice little colours.
We found I know exactly why there were 6 routers and 20 kilos, because actually one evening I come home and they were all in bags. I said, what was that? I said, well, I found a charity that actually is able to recycle them. And he was sorting them as a consequence of that. And all started because, doing the research in the house, seeing me with a kind of a taking photograph, opening cupboards. There is an element of sometimes of pride and an element of all sorts of other emotions, shame, guilt, that goes around it in terms of I remember that throwing something from my grandmother, a blanket, which was absolutely, but it was an element of absolutely guilt that I had for throwing it away. And that's why in the research they say that you go through this grieving process, because at some point in your life those things have had value, and there is a point in time that you might decide to throw it away, and sometimes no, and that's fine as well. But it's almost making visible the invisibility of it. So yes, it has been an interesting process. I put this one in particular as well because that's what he told me, that was a wireless, and I always joke about that. So. But I think all of these photographs bring things on your own houses, isn't it? It brings, you are now thinking of the cupboard where you have got all the medicines or all the cables, or mobile phones from 1985 or something like that.
Yeah, there was a fantastic workshop here at the Watershed on alternative technologies for the home. And if you get the chance to do a workshop here, I definitely would, they're fantastic. And it was we came up with the celebration of the junk drawer and the acknowledgement that we all have cupboards or spaces or within our home of these things that we don't want to part with, but we don't want out on display. And just that idea of the celebrating it and acknowledging that we all have these was something really exciting, I think, during that workshop.
Yeah. But just feel proud of it. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing it has come up in the research. Has been as well that, especially since COVID, a lot of more people work from home. Yeah. So the kind of the home has become more than a home now. It become a place of work, even a place where you do other things. So the kind of what it was the idea of the concept of the home before COVID and after COVID has significantly pivoted and changed it in some houses. And it's even more contested, and there is more conflict as well to navigate as a consequence of that. Because even working from home before COVID didn't have the implications of now Zooms, MS Teams, streaming all over the world of that. And that also has changed the type of spaces that are required to kind of accommodate all those activities.
It's partly because we can't afford a studio anymore. It's partly because we can't afford a studio anymore that we're in this situation, and also why I come here. So you always just have to find workarounds, and I think those things are changing quite a lot with the way the world is changing as well. Yeah. Thanks for making my question into a question, because it wasn't really a question.
That's fine. Go for it.
Yeah, I got into a train of thought there when you mentioned Calais. So I've got a memory of a bunch of years ago, I helped for a little bit in a warehouse that was distributing clothes to people in Calais. And we spent a lot of time just sorting between good clothes and crap. And probably quite a lot of people would have taken the crap. Not everyone's picky. But the people who were working there long term said we would never give people that stuff, because what you give to people tells them what you think of them. And remembering that made me think about volume housing, and if it's not designed with people's unconscious well-being in mind, I wonder how that affects people's feelings about society in general and how whether we are valued in society. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, basically.
There's quite a few studies actually that are saying that we care more about properties when we feel that we're emotionally connected to them. And so I think the same could be said for the people as well, feeling that you're being listened to or that you're cared for by the properties that you're being given or that you're living in. And I think they're saying that we can actually reduce waste and the environment in that way if we can have this emotional connection to where we're living. And there's not really that if it's just the same standardized plan being replicated and we don't have those emotional connections or we don't have the space to make a home our own. I think that's two sides, both the people and the property. There needs to be that.
But it's when you were talking about kind of what to give and the impression and the perception, it's really interesting because I still have my grandmother, you will have a dress or you will have something in the home and then you don't wear it anymore or it's just kind of, it's not fashionable, and she will make aprons or she will do clothes for the drying the dishes and things like that. So things were kind of becoming much more resourceful in terms of a circular economy. And sometimes nowadays we just kind of wear something and you throw it away, but without realizing that for other people it will be absolutely precious. Other people can take from one thing and then make it another. We run in UE a repair cafe, right? And our students from engineering and computing, they just repair things. And it's one of the few repair cafes in the whole of Bristol. And they are booked out completely every day. And in Boweraston, we run in a mending one to kind of mend clothes. And they are completely booked out because there is such a, and it's not just because of the mending that they do or the repairing. It also has come back a very intergenerational type of conversation. So our youngsters are making something good for kind of people that kind of might not be able to afford to kind of get it repaired, or they don't know, more than that is they don't know where, because we are so used to throw it away. So it has become a much more elements of being much more resourceful. And I'm always very aware, which I don't think is maybe okay for us, it might be okay for another one. And yeah, and you made me think another one. We also run students, you know, there is a lot of student accommodation here. So the students come by a duvet and pillowcases and they might leave. And at UE, for example, at the end of the year, we collect all the duvets and all the pillows that the students have left in all the student accommodations that we have. We wash them and we put them into our sustainability hub shop for them to be able to buy for £1 or £2, something kind of almost like to get the shop going. And it has been one of the most successful schemes that we've ever had. This idea of the circularity of what we have.
Yeah, it's funny. People are probably giving stuff to the charity thinking they're engaging in some form of circular economy. And then it's getting to the warehouse and we're like, no, it's got a hole in it, no way.
Exactly.
Hi, thank you both. I was curious about the home and the world, and this may not be directly related to your research on architecture, but the city is also a world, an architecture, a space that we inhabit. I was wondering if you had thoughts about the idea that if we were all really comfortable in our homes, if everyone had their own lovely garden, we would stop caring about the public green spaces. If you had come across anything like that in your research, which sort of...
So I mean, one of the things I found in kind of some of the kind of research has been done is the loneliness in the home. So when people become kind of older, they become less connected with their communities because we don't have real kind of... so one of the things is really interesting is Spain and UK, if that makes any sense. So I come from a tiny village in Spain, and my parents there will have a fabulous, I don't know what the kind of older generation type of life, because they've got, the village has become their community. They go to their allotments, they play cards, they go out onto the street, sit in the chairs and people passes by. That makes a massive difference in terms of place and how they feel about being part of a community and not being kind of lonely. But some of the pieces of research is like when people lose their mobility, is kind of really interesting because they sit at home, they just go kind of from the kitchen to the home, and it becomes much more restricted. And I think that's when it's really important to have kind of sense of place and community is what changes and make them feel much more useful and contested. And that was one of the things that my mom falling out from her motorbike at 77 with no helmet. My sister went into, oh my God, they are too old, she's not going to drive the motorbike ever again. But that's taking away her independence and being able to kind of be part of a community. So I said to my sister, well, from my perspective, it's fine for her to drive the motorbike when she gets okay, if she wears a helmet, please, right? So I think it's really important to not completely serve those important connections, because that fits you as a person and allows you to be part of kind of a wider city scope. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with house builders. Those sense of community don't happen. And you will see when it becomes successful in a placemaking exercise is when there is a street with a few shops, where there is a little something, and you see the people intergenerationally being able to inhabit those spaces and create a home, and that those spaces become much more successful.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm very interested in talks. My name is Martin Douglas. I work for Pad Design. We architects, urban designers, and we work a lot in volume housing. And so, first of all, I need to sort of, I guess, stick up for them to a certain extent in terms of there's nothing wrong with house types. There's been house types, you know, for hundreds of years. If you take Victorian streets, often people like to live in them. It's the same house repeated and repeated. But what they do like about them is obviously the character. They like that bit more detailing and so on. And you can see it in the area we live, where people prefer to pay more for Victorian house than a more modern house which has got better insulation and so on because they like that character. So that was interesting. One thing you didn't mention, which you might wish to think about, is the impact of parking, because that is absolutely huge on every sort of development. The amount of space, the amount of time and effort that's given over to parking is absolutely unbelievable. So yeah, I was just going to say that it might be that we might be able to, if you want to have a conversation about sort of house types, because obviously we know a lot of the house builders, we know a lot of the reasons why the housing is like it is. Often it's to do with, well, it costs us this much to build per square foot, and this is how much we sell it per square foot, so we don't have the space for the storage and so on. And it's just, there's so many issues connected with it. They have their sort of standard house types, they have their standard working drawings, so you'll say, well, can we put a window there? No, because all our drawings are done, we can't put a window there. We can't change the size of the windows, we can't change the shape of the windows. So all that was interesting when you were saying about the sort of, wanting something different. And I'll just finish, because myself and my son have got to dash off shortly and get a train. But on another thing that quite often people like about a street is you'll go down it and like there will be that repetition in the street. It'll be all brick and it'll be all, you think, oh, that looks really good. I was working on a site quite a few years ago, and the client, the house builder, said, well, we need to mix all this up. So we need a brick, we need a render, we need a blue render, we need a white render, we need something else. There's got to be a 4-bed, 3-bed, a 2-bed, etc., etc. And it's like, well, can't we have a little bit like, well, we have this, the render in this street and the brick in this street, and we have a bit more, it's a distinctive character. And they said, no, because our clients, our customers want to buy something that's different to their neighbour. So there's so many issues connected with it, but having worked in sort of for the volume house builders for a couple of decades, you kind of get to a feel for why a lot of the things are like they are, and sometimes it's frustrating and sometimes it's good, but yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there. And yeah, as I say, I've got my card. If you do want to sort of have a discussion at any time, that would be
Thank you, that would be amazing,
yeah.
because actually the research I want to be able to apply to the volume level, because I'm not naive to think that that's not going to continue to be how we produce houses. So knowing those complexities would be absolutely fantastic, if that's okay, so that we can sort of realistically see where that can go. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And I think you are, well, my PhD, which is not what I presented today, was all about volume houses. And I've never claimed that we should build bigger houses, which is one of the big things. I don't think we can afford them. But, and there is a big difference is what people think they want when they buy them, and when they put all their stuff, when they bought the house and they realize it can't fit, or they kind of is not how they live. And so, and for me as someone who has worked both in the UK and Spain, it's really interesting, because in Spain, we always have houses, and we sell rooms by meter square. How many of you knows how many meters squares your house is and your rooms are in your house? And that is one of the, in Spain, you will ask everyone and they will kind of know exactly how it, but here it's kind of, it's just fascinating that it's sold by the number of bedrooms as well. And that also has got an impact on the space that you have. So it's just kind of, I agree with you, there's a lot of intricacies as well of why houses are being built as they are nowadays, yeah.
I'm afraid it is 1 o'clock, and so we should finish on time. But I suspect that after we formally wrap up, you could probably ask a quick question to Elena and Sarah, if that's okay. But in the meantime, if everybody could just join me in thanking you both so much for such an interesting set of talks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So just to remind you, if you do want to stay with us this afternoon and Hot Desk, let one of the team know. That's me and Lawatim here, and we'll get you set up and make sure you know what the score is. But otherwise, we hope you'll join us again for a talk another time. If you're online and you have any questions, you can email us at studio@watershed.co.uk. And thank you very much.